She begged him not to touch her on their wedding night. Then he saw the bruises. Her dress slipped as she stepped back from him. That's when Nikolai Volkov saw them. Bruises covering her shoulders, her arms, her ribs. Fingerprints in different stages of healing. Purple, yellow, green. A timeline of systematic torture. His wife had been someone's punching bag for years. And the bastard responsible had just walked into his wedding reception with a champagne glass and a smile. Stay until the end, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Hit subscribe right now and comment where you're watching from. You won't want to miss this. Let's go. The presidential suite at the Four Seasons. Elegant, modern, white flowers everywhere. Champagne chilling. Romantic trap for a sham marriage. Emilia emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes after they'd entered. Changed from wedding dress into ivory silk nightgown. Beautiful, appropriate. But the way she wore it told Nikolai everything. Tugging at long sleeves. Adjusting high neckline. Armoring herself for battle. Please don't touch me. First words to her husband on their wedding night. Nikolai Volkov, 34, most feared man in Chicago, froze. He'd expected many things from this arranged marriage. Business transaction between crime families. Alliance to unite East Coast and Midwest territories. End to 3 generations of tension. But not this. Not the terror in her eyes. Not the way she flinched when he stepped closer. I'm not a monster, he said, keeping distance. Disbelief flashed across her face, as if every man in her life had told her exactly that right before proving otherwise. You can take the bed. I'll take the sofa. No. Voice panicked, nearly desperate. I can sleep on the sofa. I don't mind. Emilia. He stopped her spiral. It's fine. I'm not going to hurt you. She bit her lip. Eyes filling with tears she fought to contain. I need. She couldn't finish. Didn't have to. Nikolai nodded, stepped back, gave her space. But something primitive roared inside him at the sight of this broken woman negotiating her own safety on what should have been their wedding night. Emilia moved toward the bed. Stumbled slightly. Just a small misstep. But enough. The nightgown slipped off one shoulder. That's when Nikolai saw them. Bruises. Dozens of them. Covering her skin like a grotesque map of pain. Fingerprints. Belt marks. Signs of systematic, prolonged abuse. Different colors showing different stages of healing. This wasn't an accident. This was a pattern. This was control. This was torture. His blood turned to ice, then a fire. Who did this to you? Voice like death itself. Emilia's hand flew to cover the marks. Nobody. I fell. I'm clumsy. Don't lie. Not an order. Not a request. Something harder. Not to me. Not about this. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Silent. Devastating. I can't. If I say something, he'll. Single word that revealed everything. Nikolai felt ancient violence awaken in his chest. The part of him that had built an empire with bare hands and ruthless precision. The part that didn't tolerate weakness in others, but mercilessly punished those who hurt the defenseless. Look at me. He waited until she did. You're my wife now. That means you're under my protection. Nobody, and I mean nobody, touches you again. Understand? You don't understand. Shaking her head, more tears falling. He's too powerful. He has connections. I don't care if he's the president of the United States. Nikolai's voice was pure steel. If he put his hands on you, if he hurt you, he's going to answer to me. For the first time since he'd met her, Nikolai saw something different in Emilia's eyes. Not fear, not submission. Hope. Small, fragile, barely alive. But there. Marcus, she finally whispered. The word came out like a confession torn from the deepest part of her soul. Marcus Kane. Nikolai's world stopped. Then it exploded in cold, calculated fury. Marcus Kane. His sister-in-law's fiancé. Sophia's future husband. The man who'd congratulated him at the wedding reception 3 hours ago. The man who'd leaned in to kiss Emilia's cheek while she went pale as death. The man who'd whispered something that made her hand shake so violently champagne spilled from her glass. Now Nikolai understood what he'd witnessed. How long? The question came out quiet. but there was death in every syllable. 5 years. Her voice barely audible. Since I turned 21. 5 years. She was 26. This had begun when she was barely an adult. Does your father know? Bitter laugh escaped her throat. Broken. Painful. My father thought it was a good alliance. Marcus and Sophia. But Marcus decided I was more interesting. Father said I needed discipline. Structure. That Marcus would train me properly. Make me suitable wife material. Train her. Like an animal. Nikolai closed his eyes, fighting to maintain control. Vincent Reed had handed his own daughter to a sadist. Had used her as practice. As an object. And then he'd sold her to Nikolai as a consolation prize in a business deal. The marks, Nikolai said, had to force himself to continue. Are they all from him? Emilia nodded, wrapping arms around herself. He was careful. Nothing where it could be seen. Nothing photographs could capture. He always said I was his secret, his special project. The room seemed to shrink. Nikolai felt his control. That famous control that had kept him alive in a world where weakness meant death, begin to crack. Why didn't you run? Where? She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, survived too much. My father would have returned me to him. My mother's dead. Sophia doesn't know. Nobody knows. And Marcus made very clear what would happen if I told anyone. What would happen? He'd hurt Lily. Simple. Devastating. The housekeeper's daughter at my father's estate. She's 6 years old. Marcus showed me photos of where she goes to school. Her route home. Told me he could make it look like an accident. That it would be my fault. Nikolai felt something break inside him. Not his heart. He'd closed that part of himself years ago. It was his morality. His code. The lines he'd drawn between himself and monsters. Because in that moment, he realized he was willing to cross every one of those lines for her. For this broken woman who'd survived 5 years of hell and still found strength to protect a child who wasn't even her family. Look at me, he said, waiting until her eyes met his. I'm going to make you a promise, Emilia. And when I make promises, I keep them. Marcus Kane is never going to touch you again. The child will be protected. And every man who knew what he was doing to you and did nothing is going to answer for his cowardice. You can't, she began. I can and I will. He leaned forward, holding her gaze. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? The silence stretched between them, loaded with years of trauma, learned fear, punished hope. Finally, Emilia nodded. Small movement, barely perceptible. For Nikolai, it was a declaration of war. He took out his phone. Single text to his lieutenant Alexei. I need everything on Marcus Kane. Every secret, every weakness, every sin. By morning. Response came immediately. Understood, boss. Nikolai looked at his wife. At the bruises covering her skin. At the terror slowly fading from her eyes as exhaustion took over. Marcus Kane thought he owned her. Thought Chicago was far enough. Thought Nikolai wouldn't care about an arranged marriage bride. He was wrong on all counts. And by the time the sun rose over Chicago, Marcus Kane would become a hunted man. He just didn't know it yet. Emilia finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. Curled on the far side of the bed, still fully dressed, 3 pillows between them like a barrier. Nikolai remained awake, watching her tremble even in sleep. Every whimper, every flinch, every nightmare that crossed her face adding fuel to the fire burning in his chest. At 3 a.m., his phone vibrated. Alexei, boss, you need to see this. Now, send it. Files flooded his phone. Photos, police reports, medical records, financial trails. Marcus Kane's victims weren't just Emilia. 8 women total over 7 years. All young, all connected to organized crime families. All silenced. Police complaints mysteriously withdrawn. Evidence buried. Witnesses intimidated. But that wasn't the worst part. Marcus was running a side operation. Human trafficking. Young women. Network from New York to Miami. Private club in Brooklyn where wealthy men paid for access. Son of a bitch wasn't just an abuser. He was a trafficker. Nikolai's phone rang. Alexei, tell me you're seeing what I'm seeing, his lieutenant said. I'm seeing a dead man. Nikolai's voice was dead calm. His most dangerous state. What do you want to do? Call a meeting. Every family we're allied with. Tomorrow afternoon. Tell them it's priority one. Boss, if you're going after Kane, you're going against his whole family. The Kanes have connections all the way, too. I don't care if they have connections to God himself. Nikolai stood, walking to the window. Marcus Kane broke every rule we live by, and I'm going to make an example out of him. Understood. I'll make the calls. As dawn painted Chicago's sky in shades of pink and gold, Nikolai made a decision. He was going to burn the entire Kane family to the ground if necessary. Would destroy alliances that took decades to build. Would start a war that could fracture everything they created. But some things were worth more than peace. Some people were worth fighting for. He looked at Amelia, still sleeping fitfully. She'd survived 5 years of torture and still found courage to protect an innocent child. That kind of strength deserved to be honored. Protected. Avenged. And Nikolai Volkov always kept his promises. Marcus Kane's phone buzzed at 6 a.m. One of his men. Low-level enforcer, he kept on Amelia's detail. She's with him now. The Volkov wedding suite. Marcus smiled, cruel and satisfied. Poured himself whiskey despite the early hour. Good. Let her spend one night thinking she's safe. Tomorrow I'll remind her who she belongs to. He hung up, looked at the photo on his desk. Amelia, younger, terrified. First time he'd broken her properly. First time she'd learned that screaming didn't help. That begging made it worse. That silence was her only option. You can run to Chicago, little bird, he murmured to the photo, but you'll always fly back to me. He'd trained her too well. 5 years of conditioning. She couldn't escape him. Not really. Volkov might have married her, but Marcus owned her. Mind, body, soul. Tomorrow he'd pay her a visit. Remind her of the rules. Show her what happened when she forgot her place. And if Volkov tried to interfere, well, the great Chicago king was about to learn that some things you didn't touch. Some property you didn't steal. Marcus Kane didn't share, and he always took back what was his. Morning came, and Nikolai hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night making calls, mobilizing his organization, setting pieces into motion. By dawn, every resource he commanded was focused on one target. Marcus Kane. Alexei arrived at 7 with thick folders under his arm. His face was grim as he stepped into the study where Nikolai had been working since Amelia finally fell into exhausted sleep. Boss, you need to see this, Alexei said, sliding the files across the desk. Nikolai opened the first one, and his jaw clenched. A young woman, no more than 22, her face covered in bruises. The police statement attached had been filed and then mysteriously withdrawn due to lack of evidence. The second folder told the same story. Another woman, this one with a broken arm and fractured ribs. Complaint filed, then dropped. The third, fourth, fifth folders revealed a pattern that made Nikolai's blood run cold. 8 women total over the course of 7 years. All young, all connected to organized crime families, all silenced. It's not just abuse, Alexei said quietly, flipping to another section. Look at the financial records. Nikolai scanned the documents and felt rage settle into something colder, more lethal. Marcus Kane wasn't just a sadist who enjoyed hurting defenseless women. He was running a human trafficking operation. Young women were being moved through a network that stretched from New York to Miami. There was evidence of a private club in Brooklyn where wealthy men paid exorbitant fees for access to victims who had no way to escape. Son of a bitch, Nikolai muttered, his voice deadly calm in that way that made even his most loyal men nervous. The door opened, and Amelia appeared, still wearing the silk nightgown from their wedding night. Her hair was disheveled from restless sleep, and her eyes were red from crying, but she stood straighter than she had the night before. She saw the files spread across the desk, and fear flickered across her face. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Ending this," Nikolai replied, turning the folders so she could see. Marcus Kane has been hurting women for years, and he's been trafficking them. Amelia moved closer, her hands trembling as she picked up one of the files. She read through it, her face going paler with each page. When she saw the photos of the other victims, tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "He hurt so many others," she whispered. All this time, I thought I was the only one. I thought if I just endured it, if I just stayed quiet, at least he wouldn't hurt anyone else. That's what men like him count on, Nikolai said. Silence. Shame. Fear. But not anymore. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. Within the hour, he'd arranged an emergency meeting with every family allied to his organization. 9 families in total, representing power that stretched across the entire Midwest and into the East Coast. What are you going to do? Amelia asked, watching him work with something like awe in her eyes. I'm going to give them a choice, Nikolai replied. Stand with me when I destroy the Canes, or step aside. But nobody, and I mean nobody, is going to protect Marcus Kane when I'm done with him. That afternoon, the conference room at Nikolai's River North building filled with the most powerful men in organized crime. They controlled everything from construction unions to port operations, from gambling networks to political connections. They sat around the massive table with confusion evident on their faces because Nikolai Volkov didn't call emergency meetings unless there was war or unprecedented opportunity. When Nikolai entered with Amelia at his side, shock rippled through the room. Wives didn't attend business meetings. Women were kept separate from this world. But there she stood, head high despite the fear Nikolai could see in the way her hands clenched at her sides. Gentlemen, Nikolai said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. He pressed a button on the remote in his hand, and the screens around the room came alive with images. Beaten women, police reports, trafficking evidence, financial trails showing money laundering and human cargo manifests. Marcus Kane has been operating a human trafficking network under the protection of his family name, Nikolai continued. He's been doing it for years. The silence in the room was absolute and suffocating. Those are serious accusations, Victor Ramos said carefully. He was a Boston capo with connections that ran deep into old money families. The Kane family has powerful allies. Do you have proof beyond circumstantial evidence? I have 8 victims willing to testify, Nikolai replied. I have financial records that trace money from legitimate businesses into offshore accounts used to fund trafficking operations. I have locations of safe houses where women were held against their will. And I have direct testimony from someone Marcus Kane tortured for 5 years. He looked at Amelia and nodded. She stepped forward, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. Marcus Kane abused me from the time I was 21 years old, she said. My father handed me over to him, told me Marcus would train me to be a proper wife. For 5 years, he hurt me. He controlled me. He threatened to murder a 6-year-old child if I ever told anyone what he was doing. And now I know I wasn't the only one. He hurt other women. He used them. He sold them. And he did it all while hiding behind his family's name and his engagement to my sister. The men around the table shifted uncomfortably. These were men who'd built empires on violence and intimidation, but there were rules, lines that even criminals didn't cross. And Marcus Kane had crossed all of them. Your father knew about this? Asked Dmitry Kozlov, a Chicago veteran who'd worked with Nikolai for years. He allowed it to happen, Nikolai answered, which makes Vincent Reed complicit in his daughter's abuse. You can't be suggesting we go to war with the Kanes, James Chun protested. He ran operations in Detroit and had financial ties to several East Coast families. Those alliances took decades to build. The kind of conflict you're talking about could destabilize everything we've created. Those alliances are built on the blood of innocent women, Nikolai said, his voice rising with barely contained fury. Our code is clear. We don't hurt innocents. We don't traffic people. We don't allow predators to operate under our protection. Marcus Kane has violated every principle we claim to live by. He pressed the remote again, and a new image appeared on the screens. A school photo of a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. This is Lily, Nikolai said. She's 6 years old. Marcus Kane threatened to murder her to keep Amelia silent. He showed my wife photos of this child's school, her route home, told her in explicit detail how he would make it look like an accident. And he promised Amelia it would be her fault when it happened. The room erupted. Men who'd committed their own acts of violence looked at that innocent face and saw their own daughters, their own granddaughters. The code they lived by was brutal and unforgiving, but it protected children. It protected innocence. Marcus Kane had violated that code in the most fundamental way possible. Victor Ramos stood first. "I'm with you," he said simply. "My family doesn't protect traffickers, and we sure as hell don't protect men who threaten to murder children." One by one, other men stood. Not all of them. 3 remained seated, their loyalties tied too deeply to old alliances and East Coast power structures. But 6 families stood with Nikolai, and that was enough. "Then it's decided," Nikolai said. "Marcus Kane will be brought to justice by our hands, under our code. Anyone who stands with him stands against all of us." That night, Marcus Kane received word of what had happened. One of his family's allies had been in the meeting and immediately reported back. Marcus stood in his penthouse apartment, expensive whiskey in hand, and felt rage consume him like wildfire. "She talked," he snarled, throwing the glass against the wall where it exploded into glittering shards. "That stupid bitch actually opened her mouth." His lieutenant, a Scar enforcer named Ray who'd been with Marcus for years, stood nervously by the door. "What do you want to do, boss? She thinks Volkov protects her?" Marcus's voice was pure venom. "She thinks running to Chicago puts her beyond my reach? I'm going to show her exactly what happens to traitors. Gather our best men. I want 12 of them, fully armed. We're going to Lincoln Park tonight. To Volkov's mansion." Ray's eyes widened. "Boss, that's a fortress. He's got security that rivals military installations. I don't care if he's got the goddamn army protecting that house." Marcus snapped. "Emilia is mine. I spent 5 years breaking her, teaching her, making her into what I needed. And I'm taking back what belongs to me." Meanwhile, at Nikolai's mansion, security detected the approaching threat. Multiple vehicles moving toward the estate, heat signatures indicating at least 15 armed men. "Boss, we've got incoming," the head of security reported over the intercom. "Multiple hostiles approaching from the east perimeter." Nikolai didn't waste time with questions. "Full lockdown. Get Emilia to the safe room immediately." But Emilia appeared in the hallway, and she wasn't wearing the silk nightgown anymore. She'd changed into dark tactical clothing, and in her hands was the gun Nikolai had taught her to use that very afternoon during an impromptu training session. "I'm not hiding," she said, her voice steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "Emilia, this isn't a game. Marcus is coming with professional killers. I know exactly who's coming." She checked the gun's magazine with movements Nikolai had taught her just hours before. "He's coming for me, which means I face him. You said I wasn't alone anymore. You said you'd fight beside me. So let me fight beside you." Nikolai saw it then, the transformation that had been building since the moment she'd whispered the truth about her abuse. The survivor was becoming a warrior. The broken woman was finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "Stay behind cover," he said finally. "Don't take unnecessary risks. And if you get a clean shot at Marcus Kane, you take it." The assault began with the sound of the outer gate exploding. Marcus's men had brought breaching charges, and they weren't bothering with subtlety. Gunfire erupted immediately as Nikolai's security team engaged the attackers. The sound was deafening. Automatic weapons fire mixed with shouted orders and the crash of breaking glass. Emilia and Nikolai took position behind reinforced cover in the main hall. Her breathing was fast but controlled, her hands steady on the weapon despite the chaos erupting around them. Nikolai had seen soldiers with less composure under fire. Through the smoke and confusion, Marcus Kane appeared like something out of Emilia's nightmares. He moved with the confidence of a predator who'd never been truly challenged, a smile on his face that promised violence and pain. "There you are, little bird," he called out, his voice carrying over the gunfire. "Did you really think you could fly away from me?" Emilia raised her gun, and when she spoke, her voice didn't shake. "I'm not your little bird anymore, Marcus." He laughed, the sound cruel and mocking. "You'll always be mine, Emilia. That's what 5 years means. I own you, mind, body, and soul. You can marry whoever you want, run wherever you want, but you'll always be what I made you." "She was never yours," Nikolai said, stepping forward. She was a victim you tortured because you're too weak to face someone who can fight back. Marcus's attention snapped to Nikolai, and his smile turned feral. The great Nikolai Volkov, thinking he can protect her, thinking she's his now. But I made her what she is. I taught her obedience. I broke her properly. You broke nothing, Nikolai replied. You just prove you're a coward who only feels powerful when hurting those who can't defend themselves. Marcus moved then, pulling a knife from his belt and lunging forward with the kind of violence that had terrified Amelia for years. But Nikolai wasn't Amelia. He was a man who'd built an empire with his own hands, who'd survived assassination attempts and gang wars and political machinations that would have destroyed lesser men. The fight was brutal and efficient. Nikolai disarmed one of Marcus's men and used him as a human shield against incoming fire before dropping him with a precise strike. He closed the distance to Marcus, avoiding the knife slash by inches, and caught Marcus's wrist in an iron grip. The sound of bone cracking was audible even over the gunfire. Marcus screamed and dropped the knife, but his free hand was already reaching for the backup gun at his ankle. He brought it up, aiming directly at Nikolai's chest with triumph in his eyes. A single gunshot rang out, louder than all the others. Marcus jerked and looked down in disbelief at the bloom of red spreading across his shoulder. He turned slowly, and there stood Amelia with smoke curling from the barrel of her gun. I said you don't own me anymore, she repeated, her voice like ice. Marcus raised his weapon again, defiance and disbelief warring on his face. The second shot took him in the leg, and he collapsed completely, screaming and clutching at the wounds. Amelia walked forward, gun never wavering, and stopped in front of the man who'd tortured her for 5 years. She looked down at him with eyes that held no mercy, no fear, just cold determination. You told me I was weak, she said. You told me I was helpless. You told me I belonged to you. You were wrong about everything. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with every second. Nikolai looked at Amelia and nodded. She lowered her gun as police sirens grew, deafening outside the mansion. Within minutes, officers flooded through the shattered entrance, weapons drawn, taking in a scene of bodies and blood and Marcus Kane bleeding on the marble floor. Officers, Nikolai's lawyer, stepped forward from where he'd been waiting in the adjacent room. My clients acted in self-defense. Mr. Kane and his associates broke into this residence with intent to harm. We have complete security footage, multiple witness statements, and substantial evidence of Mr. Kane's criminal activities. The lead detective knelt beside Marcus, recognition flashing across his weathered face. Marcus Kane, we've had a file on you for 8 months. Trafficking charges, multiple victims coming forward. Marcus tried to speak through gritted teeth, his face pale from blood loss. I want my lawyer. This is entrapment. This is... You have the right to remain silent, the detective interrupted, snapping handcuffs around Marcus's wrists while paramedics worked to stabilize his wounds. Marcus Kane, you're under arrest for human trafficking, assault with a deadly weapon, breaking and entering, and attempted murder. You'll be transported to the hospital under armed guard, and then to county lockup. As they carried Marcus out on a stretcher, he looked back at Amelia with pure hatred burning in his eyes. You'll regret this. My family will destroy you. They'll make you suffer in ways you can't imagine. This isn't over. It's never going to be. The only thing I regret, Amelia said, her voice carrying across the demolished foyer with strength that surprised even her, is not finding the courage to do this 5 years ago. The officers took statements for hours. Amelia recounted the abuse with clinical precision, no longer crying, no longer trembling. She showed them the bruises that still covered her body. She gave them names, dates, details that corroborated everything in the files Nikolai had compiled. By the time the last officer left, dawn was breaking over Chicago, and Amelia looked exhausted but unburdened. It's really over, she asked Nikolai as they stood in the wreckage of what had been an elegant entrance hall. The immediate threat is over, he replied carefully. But Marcus's family won't take this quietly. The Kanes have power, connections, money. They'll try to bury this. Then we make sure they can't. Emilia's jaw set with determination that reminded Nikolai why he'd gone to war for her. We make this so public, so documented, so undeniable that they have no choice but to let him rot. Over the next 3 days, Nikolai and Emilia worked with federal prosecutors who'd been building a case against Marcus for months. The evidence was overwhelming once victims started coming forward. The 8 women from Alexei's files all agreed to testify. Financial records proved the trafficking operation. Security footage from the mansion showed Marcus's assault clearly. But on the 4th day, everything shifted. Vincent Reed, Emilia's father, arrived in Chicago unannounced and demanded a meeting. He sat across from Nikolai in the study, looking older than his 60 years, his hand shaking slightly as he tried to maintain the patriarch's dignity he'd worn for decades. "I came to discuss the situation with Marcus," Vincent began, but Nikolai cut him off with a look that could freeze blood. "The situation? That's what you're calling 5 years of systematic torture of your own daughter?" Vincent flinched. I didn't know the extent of what he was doing. I thought he was teaching her discipline, preparing her for marriage in our world. "I never intended." "You handed her to a monster," Nikolai said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You told him to train her like an animal. You ignored every sign that something was wrong because it was convenient for your alliance with the Kane family. I made a mistake." Vincent's voice cracked. "I admit that, but destroying the Kanes will destabilize the entire East Coast. There are arrangements, treaties, business agreements that have existed for generations. If Marcus goes to prison, if this becomes public—" "It's already public," Emilia said, stepping into the room. She'd been listening from the hallway. "The FBI has the files. 8 victims are testifying. The trafficking network is being dismantled as we speak. And I'm going to testify too, Father. I'm going to tell everyone exactly what you allowed to happen." Vincent stood abruptly, his face flushing with anger and shame. "You don't understand what you're doing. The Kanes won't forgive this. They'll come after you, after Volkov, after everyone associated with taking down Marcus. This vendetta will destroy more than just one man." "Then let them come," Nikolai replied. "I've already sent word to every family from here to New York. Anyone who stands with Marcus Kane stands against me. Anyone who tries to protect a trafficker and child abuser will be treated as an enemy of every organization that lives by any code at all." Vincent looked between them, seeing the unified front they presented, and something in him seemed to break. "Emilia, please. He's going to marry your sister. Think about Sophia. Think about the family." "Sophia is ending her engagement," Emilia said coldly. "She's already released a public statement. And as for family, you stopped being my family the day you handed me to Marcus Kane and told me to be grateful for his attention." Vincent left without another word, his shoulders slumped in defeat. After the door closed, Emilia turned to Nikolai with tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were relief. "I never thought I'd have the strength to stand up to him," she whispered. "You always had the strength," Nikolai replied, pulling her close. "You just needed someone to stand beside you while you found it." 2 weeks later, the preliminary hearing began. The courtroom was packed with victims, families, reporters, and representatives from crime families across 3 states. Marcus sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his shoulder and leg still healing from Emilia's bullets, his expensive lawyers surrounding him like a protective barrier. But no amount of legal maneuvering could overcome the evidence. One by one, victims took the stand. They told stories that made hardened criminals in the gallery shift uncomfortably. They showed scars, both physical and emotional. They identified Marcus as their abuser with voices that shook but never wavered. When Emilia's turn came, she walked to the witness stand with her head high. She wore a simple blue dress and no jewelry except her wedding ring. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. For 2 hours, she recounted 5 years of systematic abuse. She described the first time Marcus hit her, how he'd apologized and promised it would never happen again. She detailed how the violence escalated, how he controlled every aspect of her life, how he threatened Lily to ensure her silence. She showed the courtroom photographs of Bruises in various stages of healing, a timeline of torture that made several people in the gallery leave the room. Marcus's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting she was lying for revenge, that she was an opportunist who trapped Nikolai Volkov into marriage. But Amelia didn't break. She answered every question with calm precision, and when the lawyer asked why she hadn't reported the abuse earlier, her response silenced the entire courtroom. "Because Marcus Kane convinced me that I was worthless," she said. "He spent 5 years teaching me that I deserved the pain, that no one would believe me, that speaking up would only result in more suffering for me and death for an innocent child. He was very good at making me believe I had no choice but to endure. But he was wrong. And I'm here today to make sure no other woman has to learn that lesson the way I did." The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and danger to witnesses. Marcus would remain in custody until trial. As officers led him away, he looked back at Amelia one final time, and whatever he saw in her eyes made him look away first. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Amelia had prepared a statement with Nikolai's help, and she read it clearly into the cameras that would broadcast her words across the country. "I'm speaking today for every woman who's been told her pain doesn't matter. For every victim who's been silenced by threats and shame. Marcus Kane used his family's power to hurt people for years, and he did it because he thought he could get away with it. But silence protects abusers. Speaking up protects survivors. If you're in a situation like I was, tell someone. Keep telling until someone listens. And if no one listens," she looked at Nikolai, standing beside her, "find someone who will fight beside you." That night, back at the mansion, Amelia finally allowed herself to break down. The adrenaline that had carried her through testimony and press conferences faded, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Nikolai held her while she cried, not trying to fix anything, just being present. "I keep thinking about all the years I stayed silent," she said between sobs. "How many other women he hurt because I was too afraid to speak up." "You were surviving," Nikolai replied firmly. "You protected a child. You did what you had to do to stay alive. And the moment you had the chance to fight back, you took it. That's not weakness, Amelia. That's incredible strength." She looked up at him, this man who'd gone to war for her, who'd risked everything to give her justice. "Why did you do all this? The meeting with the families, the investigation, the risk to your own position. Why fight so hard for someone you barely knew?" Nikolai was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because when I saw those bruises on our wedding night, I saw a woman who'd survived 5 years of hell and still had the courage to protect an innocent child. That kind of strength deserves to be honored, not ignored. And because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about an arranged marriage and became about making sure you got the life you deserved." "What life is that?" Amelia asked softly. "One where you're safe, where you're free, where you never have to be afraid again." He brushed tears from her cheeks. "And if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of that life. Not because of our arrangement, but because I choose you. Every day, I choose you." Amelia kissed him then, and for the first time since their wedding night, there was no fear in the gesture, just gratitude and the beginning of something that felt like it might eventually become love. But even as they held each other, both knew the fight wasn't over. Marcus Kane was in custody, but his family's retaliation was coming, and when it did, they would face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. 3 months passed before Marcus Kane's trial began. 3 months of mounting tension as the Kane family tried every angle to have charges dismissed, witnesses intimidated, evidence suppressed. But Nikolai had anticipated every move, countering with his own network of lawyers, protected witnesses, and political pressure that matched theirs dollar for dollar. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. 8 women testified about systematic abuse. Financial experts traced money from legitimate Kane family businesses into offshore accounts, funding trafficking operations. FBI agents detailed the Brooklyn Club, where victims were held and sold. Security footage from Nikolai's mansion showed Marcus's assault with crystal clarity. Amelia testified again, this time for the formal trial. She wore navy blue and sat in the witness box with her spine straight, answering every question without hesitation. When Marcus's defense attorney tried to suggest she'd fabricated the abuse to trap a wealthy husband, she looked directly at the jury. "I didn't want to marry anyone," she said clearly. "I wanted to disappear where Marcus Kane could never find me. But my father arranged the marriage to Nikolai Volkov, and on my wedding night, I begged my new husband not to touch me because 5 years with Marcus had taught me that men only cause pain. Mr. Volkov saw the bruises Marcus left on my body and chose to believe me when my own father wouldn't. That's not entrapment. That's the first time in 5 years anyone treated me like a human being." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict with a steady voice. Guilty on all counts: human trafficking, aggravated assault, kidnapping, conspiracy, racketeering. Marcus's face drained of color as the judge pronounced sentence. 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted. Victims sobbed with relief. Reporters rushed for the doors to file their stories. Marcus's mother screamed that this was a travesty of justice. But Marcus himself just stared at Amelia with empty eyes, finally understanding that he'd lost everything. His freedom, his family's reputation, his power, all because he'd underestimated the woman he'd spent 5 years trying to break. As officers led him away in chains, he didn't try to make threats or promises. He simply looked at her one last time, and Amelia met his gaze without flinching. She'd faced her monster and won. Outside the courthouse, Nikolai waited with an umbrella as spring rain fell across Chicago. Amelia emerged from the building, surrounded by other victims who'd testified, women who'd found courage in each other's stories. They hugged her, thanked her, promised to stay in touch through the support groups they'd formed. When she finally reached Nikolai, she didn't say anything. She just stepped into his arms and let him hold her while rain drummed against the umbrella and cameras flashed in the distance. "It's really over," she whispered against his chest. "Yes, it's really over." That night, Vincent recalled. Amelia almost didn't answer, but Nikolai encouraged her to hear whatever her father had to say. She put the phone on speaker. "I saw the verdict," Vincent began, his voice rough with emotion she'd never heard before. "I wanted to say that I'm proud of you. For your testimony. For your strength." "You don't get to be proud of me," Amelia replied, her voice hard. "You handed me to a monster and called it discipline. You had years to notice something was wrong, and you chose not to see it. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I failed you when you needed protection most." He paused, and she heard him take a shaky breath. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that your mother would have been proud of the woman you've become. She would have protected you the way I should have." Amelia's eyes filled with tears at the mention of her mother, dead for 12 years now. "Don't you dare use her memory to make yourself feel better about what you did." "I'm not. I'm just telling you the truth. Your mother was the strongest woman I ever knew, and she raised you to be just like her. I try to break that strength because it scared me, and I failed you both." Another pause. "Sophia wants to see you. She's in Chicago. I think you should talk to her." The call ended, and Amelia stood there staring at the phone in her hand. "Do you want to see your sister?" Nikolai asked gently. "I don't know. She was engaged to Marcus. She was supposed to marry him. How could she not know what he was? The same way you hid it from everyone for 5 years. Men like Marcus are very good at showing different faces to different people." Amelia nodded slowly. "Call her. Tell her she can come tomorrow." Sophia arrived the next morning looking thinner than Amelia remembered, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard truths. The sisters stood facing each other in Nikolai's living room, years of separation and secrets between them. "I didn't know," Sophia said immediately, tears already streaming down her face. "I swear to God, Amelia, I didn't know what he was doing to you. If I had known, if I'd seen any sign." "He made sure you wouldn't see," Amelia interrupted. "That's what predators do. They're charming and perfect to some people while terrorizing others in private. I keep thinking about all the times you looked uncomfortable around him, all the times you made excuses not to attend family dinners when he'd be there. I thought you were just being difficult or jealous that I was engaged." Sophia's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I should have asked. I should have paid attention. Emilia felt her own tears start to fall. Despite everything, Sophia was still her sister. Still the person who'd braided her hair when they were children, who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd held her when her mother died. He fooled everyone, Emilia said quietly. Even me at first. He was so charming, so attentive. By the time I realized what he really was, I was already trapped. The sisters embraced, both crying, both mourning the years they'd lost to Marcus Kane's manipulation. Sophia pulled back first, wiping her eyes. I testified too, at the trial. The prosecution called me as a witness about Marcus's behavior, about the Kane family's business dealings. I told them everything I knew. She took Emilia's hands, and I'm starting a foundation for victims of abuse in organized crime families. Women who can't go to regular authorities because of who their families are. I want to use father's money for something good. That's incredible, Emilia said, genuine admiration in her voice. I learned from the best. Sophia smiled through tears. You survived 5 years of hell and came out fighting. You're the strongest person I know. Over the next few months, life found a new rhythm. Emilia threw herself into running the Rebirth Foundation that Nikolai had funded. She worked with other survivors, helped them find safe housing, connected them with therapists and lawyers. She shared her story openly now, no longer ashamed of the scars Marcus had left. Nikolai watched her transform from the terrified woman he'd married into someone fierce and purposeful. She laughed more easily now. She initiated touch without fear. She made decisions about the foundation without seeking his approval first. She was becoming the person she was meant to be before trauma tried to break her. One evening, 6 months after the trial, Nikolai found her on the mansion's balcony overlooking the city. She was wearing one of his shirts and looking out at Chicago's lights with a peaceful expression he'd never seen before. What are you thinking about? He asked, joining her at the railing. I'm thinking about how different my life is now compared to a year ago. Last year at this time, I was still living in Father's house, still enduring Marcus's visits, still believing I had no choice but to suffer in silence. She turned to him with tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. And now I'm here. I'm safe. I'm free. I'm helping other women find their own freedom. I have a sister again. I have a purpose. And a husband, Nikolai added with a slight smile. And a husband who gave me back my life. She reached up to touch his face. I know this started as an arrangement, a business deal between families. But somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real for me. Nikolai pulled her close, kissing her forehead. It became real for me the moment I saw those bruises and realized someone had been hurting you while the world looked away. I couldn't look away. I couldn't let it continue. I love you, Emilia said, the first time she'd spoken those words to anyone since her mother died. Not because you saved me, but because you taught me I was worth saving. Because you stood beside me instead of in front of me. Because you gave me weapons and taught me to fight instead of just fighting for me. I love you too, Nikolai replied, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. And I promise you'll never have to be afraid again. 2 years later, Emilia stood in the nursery of their home, holding their daughter. They'd named her Elena, after Emilia's mother. The baby had Nikolai's dark hair and Emilia's honey-colored eyes, and she was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. Nikolai watched from the doorway as his wife sang softly to their child, and he thought about how far they'd both come, from a forced marriage to genuine love, from victim and protector to equal partners, from survival to thriving. She's going to grow up knowing she's strong, Emilia said without looking up, somehow sensing his presence. She's going to grow up knowing that women don't have to accept abuse, that speaking up is brave, that asking for help is strength. She's going to grow up knowing she's loved, Nikolai added, entering the room and putting his arms around both of them, by parents who chose each other every single day. And that was the truth that mattered most. Their love hadn't started in romance or passion. It had started in pain and injustice and a man's decision to believe a woman's suffering mattered. But it had grown into something unbreakable, forged in the fire of facing darkness together and refusing to let it win. Marcus Kane had tried to break Emilia Reed. Instead, he created a warrior who would spend the rest of her life making sure other women never had to endure what she had. And in trying to own her, he'd driven her into the arms of a man who understood that love wasn't about possession. It was about partnership. Some love stories begin with flowers and moonlight. Theirs began with bruises and battle. But it was real, hard-won, and worth every fight. Thanks for staying until the very end. You're the reason these stories come alive. Ready for another powerful journey? Tap the next video on your screen. Before you go, drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to connect with you. We wish everyone watching good health, joyful life, and peace every day. Thanks for being with us. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.